humans are actually a lot more simpler than you might think. And some key components of that are parts of the brain that are referred to as the Reptilian Brain and the Limbic System. So I'm going to unravel mechanisms and frameworks of communication that will allow you to connect with people in a way they might have been resistant to if you didn't apply this. So have a listen. Welcome to the NZ Guide to Financial Freedom podcast. It's run by the co-founders of a free online learning platform called moneyskills.co.nz, and it has the sole mission of providing every New Zealander the opportunity to live a more fulfilling life. So let's get into it. Humans don't really evolve that much. And you could probably think of some friends where, well, maybe not friends, maybe colleagues that you're pretty confident they haven't evolved. But there's some truth, the way the brain's structured, and also, whether certain genetic information is expressed and the way things are replicated and the way we actually define ourselves as humans hasn't changed a whole lot. What's actually changed over time is the cultural evolution where we're creating things, we're interacting with people in a unique way. It's unprecedented, the way of which we're communicating through social media and the long-term impact of that, what could happen. The other thing is, we're very impressionable. We don't try and confirm we don't try and find the truth. We try and confirm what we already know. Now, if you've got social media that just keeps showing you and testing and trying to find the things that it believes you want to see, you're further reinforcing that viewpoint, and it's harder and harder to find common ground between people that think differently from that perceived identity that you've created. This is an important thing to be mindful of with the reptilian brain. And the part of the part of the brain that reacts first, it's the furthest down the brain stem. You get the information and then it interprets that information in a very quick way. And it's quite useful to understand that about humans because you can use that to be more influential. A way we would do that in sales was, let's say we're in a shopping center where there's a lot of space between the potential new client and us. And they'll talk about this idea of 10, 5, 2. 10 meters away, you make eye contact. 5 meters away, you engage them. And then 2 meters away, you create a command. You say, hey, before you go, I'll show you this. Now, this becomes important because if you go back to caveman times, let's assume the hypothesis I have that we haven't evolved a whole lot. It takes millions of years for us to be humans. You could argue billions of years if you talk about the creation of Earth and how we, progress from single-cell amoebas to mammals, from primates to humans to Homo sapiens sapiens, from Neanderthals to what we are now. It's a very slow and long process, and we don't have the same selective pressures that we might have had back then because people are able to live when in the past they would have died, even if it was like hygiene reasons, whether you die of dysentery because you can't get enough food and you got explosive diarrhea, but you didn't necessarily want to know that. But let's assume the hypothesis is we haven't evolved much since we first came into civilization. Now, with that in mind, imagine you're a caveman and you see someone from a tribe you've never seen before, so you're naturally apprehensive. And you see this in animals. So let's say you're approaching a bird, they make themselves big, imposing, and that engages the fear and tentative aspect of the animal that it's presenting itself to. It's imposing, and it's sprung and it's surprised, and there's a moment of time where that animal is trying to work out how you're reacting. So imagine there's someone from a different tribe. They're walking up to you and they're thinking, who is this person? Are they a threat? Are they dangerous? Can I overpower them? That sort of thing. So if you're approaching someone from a distance, initially what you can do is occupy space. So you take up space, and you be mindful from the last episode about mirroring and matching that if you become too imposing, then it's unrelatable, they'll be afraid and they'll run. So you want to navigate that somewhat. But from a distance, you're occupying space. So the natural reptilian brain reacts, oh, is this a threat? They look very imposing. Why do they seem confident? And then the second piece is the communication. So you'll see with animals, they use a warning call, a certain type of tonality that if it's shared in the right way, they think danger, or what is this? What's going on? Now with humans, especially Australia and New Zealand, is where there's quite often an inflection of tonality at the end. There's a questioning tone. How you going? What are you guys up to today? Like it's a seeking rapport tonality. Whereas if you're trying to snap and connect with someone's reptilian brain because there's not enough of an opportunity for you to connect, what you can use is tonality where the tonality is sharp. It doesn't inflect at the end. It just projects on the same tonality. So let's say you see someone on the street. You're like, hey, how you going? There's a certain, you might not have liked that because you're listening on the podcast. And why the fuck did Ryan just shout there? So apologies. Sorry for that. But you notice that tonality, it's very sharp. It's not rapport seeking. And you combine that with the imposing body language that you're creating because they see the body language first. They're like, whew, what is this? Danger? I'm a caveman. I see another caveman. And they seem very confident. And then a sharp tonality. I like, whew, okay, this is something I should respect. And then when you appeal to the second piece, which is the limbic system, the emotional part of the brain, is let's say, people are used to walking past you on the street all the time and someone's trying to sell them something and they say, hi, how you going? So they've already got this preconceived mechanism. The brain has already created shortcuts on how, when I receive this certain stimulus, when someone asks me, how you going? I naturally go down that neurotic pathway. So I'm actually reacting instead of making a conscious choice. So the second piece of if you're trying to connect to someone's reptilian brain, and then the next part, the limbic system, is that you break them out of the unconscious reactions that they have. And a good way to do that is what's called a situational opener, where you use something unique about that person that's different from the habit that they might have experienced, the how are you habit, and you connect with them in a different way. So, you make a comment about their clothes or their shoes or the way they're walking or something that's unique to them that doesn't have that short neurotic pathway that just, neurotic's not the right word, neural pathway. So you don't engage that short circuit because otherwise it's hard to redirect them. So first you had the imposing body language. Then you had the sharp tonality that's not trying for rapport, communicating to their reptilian brain. Okay, this is something I need to take notice of. The second piece is we want to engage the unconscious habits that they've created and snap them out of them because they're going to react to you in a certain way. So it's effectively what's called a pattern interrupt. You'll see that with people that hypnotists. Oh, fucking words are hard today. This is a Saturday. I'm going to take my flip-flops off because they're getting hot. So you'd see it with a hypnotist is that they'll use a normal pattern that creates a normal pathway. So we've created a shortcut, and that's usually hand shaking. So what they'll do, they'll shake your hand and then they'll click and whistle. So it's a combination of a regular habit interrupted by a new habit. So normal handshake, strange thing, and then they become impressionable in that moment. So now if you're using the analogy of someone walking down the street, they're walking along, they see the imposing body language, they feel the sharp tone, and they're about to react to you in a certain way, but you say something unique to them, and that, whew. So in that moment, they're impressionable. You've interrupted a normal pattern that they expect, and now they're not quite sure where to go because there's a combination of fear, there's a combination of uncertainty, and then they sort of lost the usual mechanisms with a pattern interrupt. So this is getting very manipulative. So, you got to weigh it up. There's a fine line between charisma and empathy and manipulation. So in this instance, what you're actually doing is you're appealing to the emotions, the unconscious biases, and snapping them out of usual habit. And then when they're approaching you, what you do is you give them a command. So before you go, I'll show you this. And a very fascinating thing that I noticed is there's a way to put social pressure on the person without actually saying anything more. And how you would do that is, you do the sequential thing, reptilian brain, break the pattern, give a command, and then the final piece was break eye contact. And what that does is you've committed, so you're assumptive, you're confident, you've appealed to the intrigue. They're like, what is this? But mainly you've turned away with the expectation that they'll come. And if they don't, they feel the social pressure, the social obligation, this learning of like, hey, when I meet a new tribe of people, I need to be cautious. I need to be mindful of how I perceive socially, because without them, I can't survive. So you turn after the command, and then they come over, and then you start talking from there. So that's an example of how you can appeal to the reptilian brain and the concept of pattern interruptions. Now, if you're not necessarily standing in a shopping center or on the street, or you're trying to get someone's attention, it is a useful thing, but it's specific. It's very specific. So then you got to be mindful of, okay, how might I be engaging the reptilian brain and the limbic system right now? Am I creating an unconscious pattern where they're just reacting instead of treating me as an individual? Or am I disrupting that pattern and they're in an impressionable state where I can suggest something? So I'm not saying when someone comes in to say hi, you shake their hand and go, boom, and then you like start trying to be a hypnotist. I'm not saying that at all, but it's just being mindful that, for example, people might need the illusion of space. So you're talking to someone, mirroring and matching. If you're facing them directly and they're really like one of those aliens that like holding eye contact, then okay, hold eye contact. But generally, people feel safer when there's an exit. So, for example, what you could do is when you're talking to them, instead of talking directly, you stand beside them. That gives them the illusion of space. It's not as confronting, and there's more of a collaborative side as opposed to I'm imposing to you. Sure, logically, the prefrontal cortex is understanding, okay, this person, we're not in, caveman times. They're probably not going to kill me. We're just having a conversation. That part's there, but the underlying reptilian brain that's just reacting is like, ooh, there's no escape. Like, I feel sort of confined. Why are they imposing and why are they in front of me? So you turn to the side. You talk to them on the side. They feel safe. The other thing is the reptilian brain, if there's an object between you and them, there's not that connection. So if you're door knocking, if you're a residential salesperson and you're knocking on the door, one of the key things that you need to do immediately is most houses, they have a fly door. It keeps the mosquitoes out, but it lets the wind in. You got to open that. Open that first. Feels uncomfortable. You're opening a door of a person's that, you haven't met yet. And then you knock on the top corner. Usually the top corner has the highest projection. I'm telling you, I've been very fearful. So I've, psychologically analyzed all aspects of selling. But you knock on the door and you remove the object. A metaphoric object, a mental object, and a physical object, there's still an object. So if you've got a physical object in front of you, it also acts as a mental object to the reptilian brain. So what you got to do, open the fly door, knock on the door, and then when they open the door, they're effectively connecting with you with less barriers. And then the other thing to be mindful of is you're knocking on someone's territory. You wouldn't just walk up to a lion that's eating its fucking food and just like grab some. You show that you're not a threat. You actually be more approachable. You create distance. So you knock on the door, you take a few steps back, and then you'd show yourself open and not something to be fearful of, but something that's confident. And you'd use the same concept of the tonality and the same concept of breaking the pattern that they're used to, because you've only got a short window, and each window buys you more time. Now, the other thing might be you're in a job interview. I got offered a job purely for doing this one thing, she said. So I came in. I ended up didn't want the job in the end. But I came in, I sat down, and there was a choice. There was all these different chairs, but there was a choice to sit on the corner to her corner. So instead of sitting opposite her with the physical object between her and I sat beside her, in the same concept where there's a sense of camaraderie, there's not an object between us, and we're side to side so she doesn't feel like she's confined. There's still an exit. And so we talked for a while, and, I said a few good things, I said some dumb things, but for the most part I did all right. And she's like, you know what? I feel like I just want to offer you the job, just the vibe, and you chose to sit next to me, and yeah, I feel like I'm just going to, fuck it. Do you want the job? And I was like, oh, look, I'm seeing these different jobs, so let me think about it. But it was really a pleasure to talk to you. So just that simple awareness of how an object or how the way you sit or the way you communicate can impact a person's perception of you and creates the illusion of safety. The other way you might use this is the feeling of light. So, if a very, very well-lit room, for some people, you can be mindful of their body language. They might be tightening up. They might not feel safe. That because they can see everything around them, they feel more comfortable. The inverse is also true, is where they feel more comfortable in the dark because you give them the illusion of space. So it's just all these little subconscious mechanisms that make us react is something to be mindful of. There's also flipping the lid, where the brain actually flips the lid, where the logic, like physically lifts the lid, where the natural prefrontal cortex, and to be logical, is shut off because their emotions are so strong. So the first thing when you're trying to redirect someone isn't to actually change their mind, it's to change their mood. So they're very angry, they're volatile, they're uncomfortable, so you let that come out, because no matter what you say, the emotions have started, the lid has been flipped, and you can't connect with them because they've lost their logical faculties because they're caught up in the emotion. So you're just letting the emotion down, just like a dog that's really angry. If you start yelling at a dog, fucking dog, you're angry, and then it's angry, and then you're just adding to the energy. But you're like, hey man, like, whoa, it's okay, and it snaps at you, and you're like, whoa, it's okay, like, and then the energy comes down. You might need to mirror them somewhat, like we learned in the other episodes, reach them on their level and then bring them down into your frame of mind. But it's things like that around the reptilian brain. So it was a very specific discussion, but just be mindful that people are going to react to your tonality and your body language first, because that's the first thing that appeals to them. Tony Robbins likes the saying of style is more important than substance initially. So the way you communicate is more important than the words you use, and the content of what you're saying is more, the style of it and how you present it is actually more important than the substance. So that just be mindful of that when you come across people in life. Is the setting giving them the feeling of safety? Is there tension in their neck, their eyes? Like, is there another way where you can create a level of safety? You can actually voice the emotion. You're like, hey, I don't know why it seems like you're a little stressed out and nervous. Are you okay? And then they talk about it, and then it's not consuming them. The other thing is you might feel that as well. So you might vocalize that with the people. You're like, hey, look, I feel really uncomfortable now. I wonder if I can just like let these emotions out so that we can connect right now. Like, is it okay if I just, I'm really overthinking what you're thinking of me. Can I just express these emotions? And then you're not going to get into a position where you're losing the logical faculties. Your lid's not flipping, and you're creating a level of safety. So the framework of the reptilian brain and the limbic system feel comfortable enough for you to start expressing and connecting. So we learned about reptiles. And if it was useful, give us a subscribe on YouTube or Spotify. And just a review would mean the world. And also it means that more people can listen to this, can connect more effectively, can improve their finances, learn from top business leaders. And I'll read it out. So if you want a bit of clout, or you want to write some fucking hilarious review, that'd be crack up. So yeah, thank you guys.